Welcome to PTI BetterGradesFast.com multimedia tutorials. This language arts session will be on phrases and clauses. First, we will look at what is a phrase. A phrase is usually considered to be a group of words that don't make sense. This is a common misunderstanding. Instead, we should look at a phrase as a group of words that has no subject and no verb. For example, the phrase blue and white bag. Blue and white bag makes sense, meaning you can picture a bag that's colored blue and white in your mind. However, it cannot stand on its own, meaning it has no subject and no verb. You cannot say blue and white bag, full stop, and then move on to another sentence. This therefore makes those group of words a phrase. Some other examples of phrases are in the park, with anger, through the river, by the sea, red car, extremely expensive watch. These are all examples of phrases because they cannot stand on their own. No subject, no verb. Phrases are fairly simple to understand, making them easy to identify in your sentence. Remember that phrases can be found in any sentence that you are writing. The type of phrase would be determined by the main word in it. For example, with the phrase in the park, this is considered to be a prepositional phrase. Why? Because it begins with in, which we know is a preposition because it's a word that gives direction. If we have a phrase such as blue and white, that would be considered an adjectival phrase because the main words in it, blue, white, are colors, which are adjectives because they are describing words. This is how you identify different types of phrases in any sentence given. When reading, see if you can figure out what parts of your sentences are phrases, and furthermore, what types of phrases they are based on the parts of speech that they begin with. We now can move on to clauses. Unlike phrases which have no subject and no verb, clauses have a subject and a verb. Clauses can be divided into two main groups. The first type of clause that you will recognize is the main clause. A main clause can also be referred to as a principal clause or an independent clause. These three terms all mean the same thing. They are just synonyms or similar words for the same expression. When you see a main clause, this means that the subject and the verb given can stand on their own. This shows that a main clause can be considered a sentence. For example, she fell. Here we have an action word, a verb, fell. We also have a subject, she. Although this is only two words in length, it is a main clause. otherwise known as a short sentence, because with a verb and a subject, it can stand on its own. If I simply say, she fell, you can't put a full stop at the end because it is a complete thought. A main clause can stand on its own. On the other hand, a subordinate clause, also known as a dependent clause, cannot stand on its own. It is still a clause because it has a subject and it has a verb. However, it is only part of a sentence. You cannot put a full stop at the end of a subordinate clause and have a correct sentence. Let me show you an example. After the phone rang, we have a verb, rang. We have a subject, the phone. But can you say after the phone rang, full stop? No, you cannot. It is not a complete thought. Even when reading it, you can tell that something is missing. After the phone rang, something else is supposed to happen. This would therefore mean that this clause is subordinate. It cannot stand on its own, although it has a subject and a verb. Usually, subordinate clauses fall at the beginning of sentences, and they are often followed by a comma. That can help you identify your subordinate clauses easily, but remember, this is not always the case. So do not think that if there is no comma, that means that your sentence has no subordinate clause. This is just a common occurrence, but still use your rules to see if it can stand on its own or not. Other examples of subordinate clauses are before I went to school, while riding my bike, if I were taller. These are all examples of subordinate clauses which fall at the beginning of sentences. It is easy to find a main clause example because remember, main clauses can stand on their own. Even if you have a very lengthy sentence, it will be considered a main clause once it has a subject and a verb that can both ensure that it stands alone. For example, she has been studying for 10 years and she is now a successful journalist. There are two main clauses in this sentence because there are two verbs and two subjects, meaning you can divide the sentence and find two separate clauses. On the other hand, if I have a sentence that says, after the phone rang, my mother ran to answer it. After the phone rang would be your subordinate clause. My mother ran to answer it would be the main clause because that part of the sentence can stand alone. You cannot say after the phone rang, full stop, but you can say my mother ran to answer it, full stop. Subject and verb are present, therefore these are considered clauses. Just to recap, a phrase is a group of words with no subject and no verb. You can decide on what kind of phrase you are given by figuring out the main word in the phrase and identifying its part of speech. For example, in the park would be a prepositional phrase because it begins with a preposition. When we are talking about clauses, we are talking about a group of words that has a subject and a verb. The two different types of clauses are main clauses and subordinate clauses. Main clauses can stand on their own. Subordinate clauses can't. They usually begin a sentence and they usually have a comma. These rules will help you to divide your sentences correctly and therefore be able to locate phrases, main clauses, and subordinate clauses in any sentence that you may read or write. Thank you for choosing PTI BetterGradesFast.com.